Without further ado, I want to introduce you to the moderator of this next session, which is all about event tech procurement. And it's talking about the pitfalls and strategies for success. Success. See, the panel was actually saying this is a safe space if you have a hangover today. So it might look like I might need to sit down here and take a little bit of a break. Yeah, I'll take a break. Anyway, over to the moderator, Joe Atkins from Lineup Ninja.
Okay, thank you, Cecilia. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session. Can everyone hear okay? I know that's a bit of a daft question, because if you can't, you wouldn't have heard the question. So, but if I want to see a few nods, or kind of if you can hear okay. If not, please, I guess, come down the front, or go and see Tony at the back, who's the sound guy. And if you can't see or hear, do feel free. There's a few seats at the front. Yeah, to look after your own accessibility needs if they're not being met. Okay.
Let's put this here.
So, looks like Cecilia's mic's still on. So this session is going to be about event tech procurement. So the intention being that should be fairly relevant. You know, you're all here to look at technology, presumably with a view to procuring some. So we're going to have a look at some of the pitfalls, things that can go wrong. So hopefully you can learn from some of the mistakes that some of the panelists have made before. And avoid those, and maybe they've got some good tips for how to get things right in the future. So the panel consists of, to my immediate left, Michelle Bruno, who is a journalist and marketer. She works with Dahlia Plus agency. She's got extensive experience in the event industry, primarily over in the States, but also a little bit over here as well. Then moving across, we've got Abby Cannons. Abby currently works product marketing manager at Grip. Prior to that, she's worked at Reed Exhibitions as global innovations team, so bringing new technology into Reed Exhibitions. And prior to that, she'd worked at Slido, so another tech vendor. So she's worked sort of both sides as a vendor and as a kind of on the procurement side. And prior to that, as an event planner, so she's got lots of experience of the whole kind of all the different aspects.
Can't stop still.
Yeah. And then at the very end, we've got Nick Westerman, who is Senior Event Manager for NHS Confederation. So he makes a lot of buying decisions for them and has previously worked at a couple of different places and has done a lot of research into different event tech platforms in the past. So hopefully they've got a lot of good experience. I haven't got a lot myself, so I'm here to learn and find out, so I'm going to be asking the questions. So to kick us off, I'm going to start immediately with Michelle and just say, what are some of the things that can go wrong when procuring event tech? And that, you know, feel free to give us a horror story if you've got one, or just if it's, you know, big themes that you are aware of that when things go bad with procuring event tech.
So obviously the biggest pitfall and thing that goes wrong is you get the wrong technology for the wrong use. So that's the ultimate faux pas if you don't do the work that's required to get the technology that you need. But some of the things that I thought of that particularly the organizations looking for technology are doing perhaps not as well as they should is only looking for technology when you need it, because that puts a lot of pressure on a specific time period to find technology, and you might not have time to do the due diligence that you need in order to find the right technology if you're looking. Another thing that I see a lot in talking to companies, technology companies, is when the organizations looking for the technology get multiple bids with no intention of switching from the incumbent. And that makes the technology companies mad, and they talk, and you could get blackballed, you know, and technology companies, some of the premium players, will not return requests for proposal or tenders to you if you become known for doing that. Another thing is making the tender or the RFP so rigid that it doesn't allow for creativity on the part of the technology company. So just having a long checklist of features doesn't give them the sort of opening to talk about something creative that they might do that you didn't even ask for. And finally, this is really bad, if you send out a request for proposal or a tender, do not choose that company, but you steal their idea and give it to the company that you do choose. the event technology companies get really angry about that, and they talk, and again, it's not a good position to be in when you're the next time that you're going out for bid.
Can
Thanks.
I add to that? Because that's so poignant. Ada and I were just having this conversation with a vendor over there, Delegate Select, and they were saying exactly that they've gone in to demo, to propose their ideas, and to then be kind of, not invited back for the second stage, but you see their ideas being put into process. I wanted to add about the tight turnarounds actually on tech. Like certainly at Grip, in order for it to be successful, you have to have adequate planning. There has to be enough time for the exhibitors to come on board, for any integrations to take place, all of that stuff, and quite often, considering that we're, as an ex-event planner, we know how far, we know ages in advance how our event's coming up. Leaving it to that last minute is as you say, really annoying. But it also means that the tech doesn't have the best chance of success either. And the other one I was going to add was when you don't have the whole team's buy-in to the tech that's coming on board, and quite often that means that they're reluctant to market it. The marketing team are like, we don't want to talk about it too much in case it goes wrong, and then actually it's the sort of lack of marketing, the lack of buy-in, again causes the tech not to be able to do its job, because people just don't know, not just what it is, but what it does. What is the value to an exhibitor? What is the value to a visitor? Why should I download this app? Why should I go on to Glister and ask questions? That marketing is a really big part of it. And in order to market it to the attendees, to the exhibitors, to your participants, basically, the team need to have a good idea of what that is. So getting that buy-in at the start, not just it's not just the procuring, it's this embedding into the organisation of any new tech that comes in.
Great. And do you think that's the responsibility of the purchaser, or is it incumbent on the suppliers to actually be more proactive in that?
I think it's a partnership, isn't it? I mean, any tech supplier has heaps and heaps and heaps of experience. They deal with different types of clients all the time. They're going to have more insight, more examples, more horror stories than the organizer will when you're bringing in new tech. And so it is on it's on the partnership. You have to, the organizer has to play their part, the tech provider has to play their part as well. And trusting in that partnership is really key. As organizers, make sure if the tech company is saying, in our experience, this is how you do it best, don't divert from that, because they're not telling you that for any other reason, that they want for you to succeed. So listen to them. They know what they're talking about. Trust in the process, kind of thing.
Great, thanks. And yeah, same question to Nick. What can go wrong in your experience?
Over-speccing any project. If the event planner thinks that they know all of the things that they want from any form of technology, and then they go for, they go through a tender process where they are absolutely 100% certain they know everything there is to know about how any tech works, you're going to fail. It's so straightforward, because you might go through to a provider and say, well, I need a one-to-one meeting facility, and it has to operate like this, and it has to do this feature, and it has to do that function, because you happen to see it on someone else's event 6 months before. And that provider, talking to your point, Abby, says, well, 6 months ago, fine, that might have been the way to do it, but actually our product does it this way now. If you're shutting your mind to the idea that actually, it's not doing the thing that I want it to do in exactly the way I've said it, you can't work with that provider. But it also means that you're not going to benefit from their knowledge when you're actually trying to utilize their product.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that for a lot of event planners, it's quite a difficult balance, because in my experience, having planned events myself, you have to be quite risk averse, because when things go wrong at events, they can go wrong in a very, very public way that can be really damaging for brands. Worst case scenario, people can get hurt. So it's really important for event planners to actually be really careful about speccing things so that they're not just like, oh, we're going to do an event, let's just let all our vendors tell us what to do. So there needs to be some degree of having a sense of what you need to achieve, but also being open to some degree of innovation and being guided by your expert vendors.
I'll bring in our pandemic horror story, which was we went on a training course about how to do virtual events. This was by someone who had never delivered a virtual event, but we'd bought into the training and thought, okay, fine, we'll go through the motions. There were some things we learned that were useful. Others, it was kind of so broad brush. But we used that to build our spec for then doing our first virtual event in September of 2020. We wrote down an absolutely absurd spec at that point because we thought, oh, right, well, we need this feature and that feature and all these things are going to happen. We went through a tender process. It was hideous. And we ended up with two providers at the end of it. One that was going to charge us the earth and one that was going to charge us very little. And we thought, okay, well, the one that's charging us very little, we'll use them for a kind of more day-to-day events, and the one that's going to charge us a lot, we'll save that for really big conferences. We had our first trial with the one that was quite small on an event for about 300 people. And what the platform delivered versus our spec versus the conversations we had with them was so far apart from each other. Right. Our delegates couldn't access the platform. Those that couldn't see the video of the live stream. The supplier took it upon themselves in the live chat on the platform to criticise the NHS Confederation because it was our fault for choosing them and not being more clear with what we actually hoped to achieve. Now, we thought, basics of being able to see the content was, like the most fundamental criteria, but apparently not, because we hadn't spec'd that enough for them. But when you've got, a Q&A going absolutely wild, I can't see the video, I can't see this, and then you've got the provider saying, your fault, this is NHS Confederation's problem, speak to them. Not cool.
So that suggests to me that there's potentially kind of it's a bit of an intangible thing. Like how can you assess ahead of time the kind of culture at a supplier, and are they actually on your side or not? And how can you have a bit of a deeper view into what kind of service you're going to get, and how are they going to behave when things go wrong? And I don't know, any of you have any thoughts about how you... Right.
I think it's like a relationship, or a dating, or, even marriage. There should be red flags that are pretty obvious if and one of them would be they don't call you back for simple things. They don't send emails. They don't keep their commitments when the stakes are low. So how can you expect them to keep their commitments when the stakes are high? So be looking for all those small details, because I think it's very telling in a lot of situations. I think the other thing is look for a dedicated project manager that's given to you and give them a single point of contact so that there's only two people talking to each other and not 15 people talking about whatever, and you don't get the job done. So those are things that I could think of.
Well, I think fundamentally tech procurement is completely flawed, actually, because you go through a process and at the end of it, you appoint a supplier, probably based on some words that they wrote and a 1-hour meeting where you've had your demonstration. I think procurement now has to move to, after the demo, you get the demo environment, you have further conversations with them. You go through a couple of rounds. Yes, it's time consuming, but that time that you put into it now pays back far more in the future because you know that you're working with the right provider. I'll do a quick plug for Lineup Ninja, given that you're the host of this, but we've got a fantastic relationship with Joe. Partly because of the system of Lineup Ninja, but also because we've built a really, really strong relationship with them. And we know full well that any support that we need at any given moment is going to be provided to us. And so what we're very comfortable with Lineup Ninja is we've got a kind of double relationship. We know that the software works for us all the time, but we've also got that customer service piece absolutely nailed. And we know that we can always rely on the team to help us.
Well, thanks, Nick.
The other thing I was going to say is that this industry is very small. We're a great network of people. We all know each other, and as we were talking before the session, without naming and shaming in this arena, we do talk. And so, I think listening to your colleagues, your peers, your network about what has worked for them and what hasn't, and who hasn't, use that information, because nothing's better than testimonial, verbatim testimonial from people like you. So whether that's, I don't know, like LinkedIn boards, ask your questions in there, anything that's about it, any sort of forum for event technology, put the question out there and you'll get loads of recommendations back saying, I've used these people and they are brilliant because. So, yeah.
Just saying something like Delegate Wranglers is perfect for that. You'll get immediate feedback and response on, like, everyone's asking what's the best virtual event platform. Delegate Wranglers will tell you quite categorically, I've used this because of this. I'd recommend this because of this. It's a great source of information.
Yeah, I would say too that for some reason the buyers are really frightened of the procurement process, in that they rather do it by paper and these sort of arm's length transactions, rather than just having a nice chat and asking a lot of questions and working through it by having a conversation. And I know some of that is because, they're using platforms that are built around template RFPs, or their management requires that you have all this stuff on paper. But really a lot of this disconnect could be solved by just asking a lot of questions, getting the answers that you want, and proceeding after a lot of talking about what you need and what they can provide.
I just wanted to add, I was having a conversation with Tamar from Gleanin, who are over there somewhere, in the coffee queue actually, about how as tech suppliers, we don't want to do a hard sell. I don't want to, cold call and try and get you on board. I really don't want to do that. I don't want for you to think that when we have a conversation, I'm immediately going in for the hard sell. I would much rather have a conversation about an event and when we can help you and when we can't. I mean, working with Slido, there was quite often where we'd go, I'm sorry, we're not what you need, but I'll tell you who is. And then when you do need us, you can have that conversation later. So, yeah.
Okay. I've got opinions, but I'm going to keep them to myself for now. So it sounds like we've got there's a challenge around meeting this balance of, you need to be clear about what you want to achieve, but that isn't necessarily the same as having a shopping list of exactly what feature you need. So do you have any tips about how you do define your requirements clearly enough? And is it like a strategic level? Is it tactical? Like, how do you pitch it right to understand which suppliers are going to be appropriate and which ones aren't?
So for me now, with any form of procurement, I've gone for the broad brush approach. So I say that, it might be an AV supplier, it might be an event tech supplier. I know that I need to achieve these things. So it might be that the platform needs to be able to host video. I also know that it needs to allow delegates to connect with each other, and I know that there has to be an area for exhibitors. That's the end of my RFP. I might have a little bit of detail around that, specific to a particular event, but actually the experts need to tell me how to do it. I can't just assume that they're going to be able to fulfill a ridiculously long list, and then also expect to have something that comes back at an absurdly low price, because that's always the problem, isn't it?
So it's broad brush approach. Anything to add?
I mean, at Reed, so actually, Aid, maybe you should be up here talking about this. In the innovation team, we would benchmark, we'd do our research in advance of needing the technology and be benchmarking technologies against one another. Not just feature sets, but the kinds of events that they can serve, depending on, we would sort of segment our trade shows into types. And then we would benchmark, and we would go to a number of suppliers for a number of different things. I think, pigeonholing, certainly in our industry, pigeonholing yourself into one, like all your eggs in one basket of one provider is a terrible idea, because, quite often you'll have different shapes of events and things like that. So having that sort of, it's a luxury to be able to go off and do it, and that was my job, but being able to sort of have a good understanding of the whole of the events industry, to know then in this case I would need that. So benchmarking is really good, but go in with an open mind and just lay them out. So if this then that, if this then that. So
yeah. So as you said, you had the luxury of being able to do that because that was your job, was just to look at loads of different tech platforms and kind of benchmark them all. A lot of event organisers are pretty stretched for time. So how can you? What's the kind of minimum you can do to still come out with a successful result? I guess it's like not. So the question isn't like what's the best practice. It's like what's the worst practice that you can actually get away with, which is actually often a more useful question. So, Michelle.
Yeah, I think that depending on the size of the organization, you need to have a dedicated person whose job it is, like Abby, to go and look at tech all year long. And if you can't afford or have someone dedicated, then you need to at least have someone where you put that job responsibility into their column. Because you just have to have someone that's knowledgeable about the landscape all year long if you're going to, get the right match.
I don't accept the premise of doing the minimum. We as event managers, this is now part of our job. So there has to be an expectation that you will find the time to do it. And everyone says, well, I don't have time, or it's not on my to-do list. But actually, that's not an excuse anymore. Given that event tech plays such a fundamental part in how we deliver events, it does have to be part of your job. You have to make time if you want to succeed.
Great. So it's about turning around that scarcity mindset and thinking about actually if I invest the time in finding the right tools and implementing them properly, then that's going to save me the time that I currently think I don't have. And so I'm actually now going from time poor to time rich, and hooray, I get my weekends back. And
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. So moving like next set of questions, like let's say you've got a fairly clear but not too detailed set of requirements. You know what you're trying to achieve. You know what your goals are, your aims. You've got those nicely kind of set out. You've then got like masses of event tech providers who are all pumping similar sounding messages into the market and saying, oh, we're the best at this and you get the best support from us and we're the world leading blah, blah, blah. Where do you start your research and how do you make some sense out of all that milieu of messages? Anybody want to chime in?
That's my area of expertise. I look at origin stories a lot when I'm looking at technology. If a platform was a matchmaking app on Monday and on Friday they're a virtual platform, maybe they're not as robust as you would need. But if they've been in the market for some time, obviously that's a level of criteria that you would look at because they're obviously more experienced and things like that. In terms of differentiation, believe it or not, even in a crowded marketplace, platforms are different one from the other. They're coded differently, they have different objectives, they solve different pain points. It's just that usually the platforms don't know what those are because they're not doing a proper survey of the competitors. But when you look at them, and we're back in the North American Pavilion, I have 4 companies that do the exact same thing. And yet, in discussions with them, we're able to sort of derive from those discussions what's very, very different about each one. And the differences are there, so you just have to look and dig deep and keep asking questions until you find those.
Great, thanks. Thanks. Any other?
I think we've already covered it, which is that you have to harness the power of your network. Because otherwise you're sitting on Google, and anyone who's paid for Google Ads is up at the top, and anyone who hasn't, then you're going to probably click on them, you go through the motions with them, maybe book a demo, then you have to add them to a tender process. That doesn't really work anymore. I think you have to harness the power of your network. You have to find out through LinkedIn, through the conversations, through your wider event network, who would they recommend that you even start a conversation with? Yes, there may be providers that they're not working with who you're now going to miss out on, but realistically, you take things on word of mouth, you take things on people's experiences.
And I would look for specifically who they don't recommend. If there's a big danger sign there, then it's at least something to think about. I mean, maybe they had a bad experience, but I would look for the negative as well as the positive.
So would you actively say, who have you worked with that you wouldn't work with again? Or are you looking for, you've got a list of, these are all the big names, ask my network who everyone recommends, and if one of these names is missing from everyone's recommendations, or do you do both?
I wouldn't necessarily do that because no one has the insight into the marketplace right now to put every single potential partner on that list. There may be companies that are up and coming, but that offer an excellent product at a really good price, and they're not on the list because the only person on the list is, whatever, who shall be nameless, so no, that's sort of like looking at a list and picking and choosing, I don't think works as much. What I would ask is, who shouldn't I work with, and specifically for what reason? What went wrong? What should I look out for? It shouldn't take them off the list, but it definitely should be part of the criteria in selection.
Yeah, because there might be very circumstance-specific reasons for a relationship breaking down, which aren't necessarily the vendor's fault. Could be the person you're talking to with a nightmare. It happens. Anything else about Abby or? Okay. So we've kind of established, who the vendors might be, some ideas about how you'd narrow it down. So you've got like a list of like people who have been recommended by your networks, people you've reviewed their literature and had a look on the website. What would be the next steps in narrowing down to the kind of single vendor for that job?
It's the tender process. It's that interview process. It's talking to those vendors. It's having those conversations. It's probably seeing the product demo. It's also repeating the product demo, because whatever you saw the first time, you actually, I think, almost need to catch them out and come back to them with, I really liked that, but can you actually show me right now that you're capable of doing this? And if they have to bring more people onto a call to show that, great, because you'd rather have the experts there to do it. If they're struggling after that point, the red flags come in. No, you're not right for me. You move on.
Yeah.
For us also, we have at Grit, sorry, it's plugging, but yeah, we have a solutions design team who will look at, will past the point of demo. It's then, okay, let's look at how this could work for your events. It takes it that one step further. You can get into almost like a consultancy with an event tech company. Don't feel that you can't, because it's so right that you find the right technology. Most technology companies will go through that consultancy with you on the basis of your needs, and build the design of how you're going to use it around that. And I think that might be something that's missing for most people. You don't just need to you don't need to get to that buying stage. You can test it out, tweak it, work it. Again, if you've got enough time to play with, all of that can be done way in advance. And as you were saying, the thing is, you can't expect event organisers to know what they don't know. There might be bits of the technology that it's not on your list. You didn't even know that it did that, but actually in consultancy they say, oh, okay, well actually we also have this, which I think would work very well for your event. So again, that partnership is just so important.
Yeah, and Abby, you touched on this. I would ask for a test account and log in and play with it and move around, and if right from the get-go you can't even sign in, or there's something really, obvious, that's very telling. It's like, don't marry someone unless you live with them first.
But there's consultancy and there's consultancy. So there's a provider here who, well, they're in the middle and they may sell stoves, potentially, don't know, who took on a huge bit of consultancy work for an organisation that I used to work for. They said, we will build all the functions that you want into our platform. You've clearly got very deep pockets, we're happy to do it. And we went on an 18-month journey together where we went review after review after review, and they kept on saying all the way along, but this has to work for the rest of our clients. It can't be so bespoke to you that it completely services your needs. It has to be commercially viable. But the start of the conversation was, we will build this for you because we're going to get a lot of money out of this. And the end of the conversation, 18 months in, was, So we've stopped now. We're done. We think we've delivered what you asked us to do. And it wasn't even close. But that's because their commercial angle had to come into that, and they had to say, no. What you're asking for is actually so niche and so bespoke. There's no legs to this for any other person using our platform. And so we, the organisation back then, had to part ways in that.
Yeah, and that's, in defence of the vendors, that's a tricky dilemma to be in, you know. When vendors have very bespoke requirements, it's great if they've got requirements that you think, oh, this is going to work for all of our other clients, and actually they're going to, by doing this work for them, it's going to give a whole lot of value to us as a vendor, because it's going to mean that our product is now going to be way more sellable, and we're kind of getting paid to develop it. It's kind of a win-win. The downside is that you start developing functionality that is so bespoke, it not only means that and that's fair enough, if you develop a bespoke bit of software or hardware, whatever it is, for a client, and they pay you to do that, that's fine. But it could potentially make the presence of that additional functionality could mean that the rest of the platform is now more complicated, more difficult to use, so it actually deteriorates the experience for other clients, and that really is problematic for the vendors, I think.
I was just going to add, because this happens with us a lot, especially with our big clients, that they want additional features of grip and things like that. If we do that, sometimes we don't even take it to market, because, we wouldn't market it, because actually, it adds so much complexity that if we're building it, we are literally building it for them, because anybody else would find it so difficult to use that once you add it on to sort of general use, it's just going to. Well, I was going to use a swear word then. It's just going to mess with people's heads. They won't understand it. They don't know why it's there. And, so actually, as a product marketer, there's some things that we just don't talk about. It does it, but we're not going to tell you.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I think I wanted to make a point about the free trial period. So you sign up for a free trial account, or your sales rep or account manager, whatever, gives you a free trial account. There can be a bit of a balance between being allowed to be left alone to play with it and kind of experience it and just see what it does, which is great, because then that means you can explore it in your own time and bring your own requirements and thinking about, our process needs to do this, that, and the other. If you don't get support and input from the vendor to say, oh, you can do this, and let me show you how that works and do this, you might be missing out on loads of opportunities to streamline your process or generate revenue or save costs. So what, in your experience, what's the best way to approach that? Should you just play with it completely yourself and then come back with questions? Should you ask for some time? As a vendor, when people sign up for a free account, I'm always a little bit, I'll always reach out to them and say, I saw you signed up for a free account, please get in touch, I'd love to chat with you about how you're using the product. And for me, I'm purely interested in, is this going to work for that client? Because the last thing I want is to miss-sell to a client. And this is going to sound like horrible virtue signaling. It's not. The last thing I want is unhappy clients, because I'm in the business of trying to build a brand, and I don't have a massive marketing budget. I know everyone says I don't have a massive marketing budget. We really don't. So I need happy clients that are going to go and talk to people on delegate wranglers and say, oh, you should use this product because it's really good. So I really want to invest that time in people who are taking the free trial and help them and figure out, oh, actually, it's not right for you. Go and use these guys. They're really good. But I suspect that a lot of buyers are nervous about when a sales rep or somebody from the vendor reaches out to them and says, oh, please get in touch, let's have a call, let's hop on it, let's have a demo, and it just feels like, oh, I'm going to get sold to, and then within half an hour I'm going to be getting railroaded into signing my life away. How do we crack that nut?
I think free trials have to come after that call. If you've got on your website the opportunity to have a free account, so I don't know, take someone like Trello. Trello offering a free account, I think, is relatively harmless, because most of the kind of free functionality is there for people to be able to just kind of get on and use. there's no level of complexity. Something like Lineup Ninja, if you have to have understood the process of call for papers, how your agenda is going to flow. And so there is a level of complexity built within that product. By offering someone the opportunity to basically just have the keys and go nuts, they're not going to benefit from that at all. But if you've had that call and then you get the free account, and I also think the free account has to be linked specifically to the call having gone well, and at the end of it, the client feeling like they've had a good demo, which would therefore enable them to use the free account because they've understood the basics. You've almost trained them at the same time as selling to them.
Yeah.
If they haven't understood any of that process, so I've done it with Swoogo. Swoogo is hugely complex, but also brilliant. There's almost too much to show you how to do on a single sales call. But at the end of the sales call, I had no understanding of actually how to use Swoogo. And then they said, and here's the free account. Go nuts. I think I spent maybe 10 minutes on that and just went, no, can't do it. But then it also put me off because I thought, well, this isn't for me. It's way too complicated. I don't understand how to use it. I'm not going to bother with Swoogo anymore.
I was just going to say, like, I completely agree. It completely depends on the complexity of the product and what you're trying to do with it. I mean, lest we forget also that some of the tech providers do a freemium model where some of the features are available for you to test out. You know, Slido was one, completely free to use, the most basic of features. You get your head around that and then you go, oh, this is great, I'll buy more of it, I'll buy the additional bits. I think that's quite good for products that are less complex than, you know, like something like Grip or I mean, yours to a lesser extent. But yeah, I think, yeah, complexity is the decider there.
Yeah. I realise I'm completely guilty of doing what you were just saying Swoogo do. Of having a demo goes really well and then saying, right, go and have a play with it, and then never hearing from the prospects again because they just, what's this thing do?
I just wanted to add as well, like for some tech providers, they'll provide a bespoke sandbox for you to play in based on your type of event. I think that's, rather than just going, here's all the features. If they can do a minimal amount of setup in a sort of practice area, then that can also be good. We do that when we're further down the sort of potential to buy for people.
Right. So bringing it back to the audience, what they're looking for, look for products that give you trial accounts and maybe give you bespoke sandbox area and that are going to give you some support during that free trial period and are trying to help you succeed, really. Any things to add to what we've talked about so far? Anyone sitting there with a burning horror story or my one hot takeaway tip that you should always do?
Make time.
Make time.
Simple as that. Make time.
I was just going to say, don't forget the security aspects. Especially at Reed, we had very high high demands for how secure a platform was. Do not leave that out of your decision making. It needs to be, you really need to understand that your data is secure. And, for the bigger companies, they have people who are going to do that, but you certainly need to have the conversation around how secure your data is.
Any final thoughts? So we've got 5 minutes. Have you got any questions?
We have loads.
Great.
Actually the biggest amount of questions I've seen since I've been hosting this stage. So well done, guys. The first one I'm going to go through is actually, you mentioned this around the platforms, right, and getting a trial account. One of the questions is actually, how do you ensure a supplier tells you what the software doesn't do?
That is a near enough impossible question to answer. However, for the doesn't do, actually you're going to know that from what it does do. If you get the opportunity to properly play around with something, with actually dummy data too is the other key part of that. They can't just leave you with the key to the platform and then actually you can't do most of the things that you wanted to do because the data doesn't exist. I think you'll learn relatively quickly that there are going to be your limitations, and then that's the point. You're probably going to say, this one isn't for me.
Yeah, good answer. So then one that's been voted on as well is, there are many buyer's guides out there. What resources would you recommend?
Michelle does a great newsletter. So yeah, delegate wranglers, all of the forums, things like that. There's LinkedIn groups that are about, about the topic of event technology. Any sort of peer networking. I just wanted to go back to the question you had before, though. I don't know about you, but if your tech provider isn't telling you what it doesn't do, they're not a very nice person. I just can't imagine, not being honest about it. Sorry, I sort of backtracked a little bit, but it just fills me with horror.
Yeah.
Other buyer's guides, I know Events Industry News, associated with Event Tech Live, so they do a range of buyer's guides for Event Tech buyer's guides, conference buyer's guides, and so on. And they also run a Facebook group, Event Tech Help, which is another good source to go and ask questions about, what do you think of these people or whatever.
Great. All right. So we got a couple of more. We've got time, I'm hoping. What would you say the timeline of when people start... would you say the timeline of when people start the procurement has changed since COVID?
Shall I take that one? Well, I think the answer is no, because sadly, procurement always is a reactive process. You need something, therefore you're going to start a process. If we can, over the next few years, move to a more helicopter view of these are the annual events, these are the sort of events we run, and therefore we know we're going to need tech for it, then the procurement process could extend.
Yeah. Just for event technology in general, the sales cycle has been protracted or long for the decades that I've been in it. It's never changed. It always takes a long time to find your technology and implement it and all those things. But definitely the window of opportunity before the events is getting shorter and shorter because the events happen faster. So I think the event technology companies have learned to be more responsive. And like Nick said, the buyers hopefully will be planning a little bit longer and take a longer term view. It's not really happening now, though.
Yeah, the time frame, right, between the decision-making process as well, right, before go live.
I don't know if it's changed as a result of COVID, but I think it's quite product-specific as well. So for us, we do like content acquisition for conferences. So people are talking to us at least 10 months before the show. Sometimes it's up to 2 years. They're engaging us, whereas some other products where, I don't know, maybe it's something that's an on-the-day solution that maybe, it's a hardware thing, then it might be you can get away with engaging them in a much shorter time frame. I'm not going to speculate on what it is because I don't have that expertise in those areas. But yeah, it varies depending on the product and when you're going to need it.
Fair enough. All right, we're going to take one last question here, and it's an interesting one. They say establishing relationship with corporate business units via the procurement route is their biggest frustration. Like they're really struggling with that. What tips would you give someone who is struggling with that relationship?
I don't know, it's difficult. I mean, we worked at RX together, and it is difficult. Any of the big corporate organisations, they work quite in quite a siloed way anyway. Just because as a tech provider you've got into one show does not mean that now you work for Reed Exhibitions globally. It just doesn't work like that. Each show has its own needs. It's I think just keeping the relationship. If you've got a foot in the door, keeping that relationship sweet, so that those events, a bit like what we were talking about before, that people use their network. So the show directors will talk to one another and go, actually, we've just been using this. I think that's getting the in, maintaining the relationship, and letting that spread naturally internally is probably the best way. Even though it's not really a tip. It's hard. It is hard.
Anyone else?
I think you have to have a good product. If you have a good product, people will recommend you, and you'll just be able to penetrate further into the organization and find other people and spread organically.
All right. Do we have any questions from the audience? All right. No? Well, Joe, Abby, Michelle, Nick, thank you so much. That was super interesting. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. And thank you, everyone, for your attending.
Thank you.